Big decision last night came out. The Supreme Court requiring the Trump administration to facilitate the release of a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to a prison in El Salvador. Kilmore Bill Albreo Garcia had an immigration court order preventing his deportation from the country amid fears that he could be harmed by gang members. But last month, ICE officials removed him anyway from the United States, claiming that he was a member of MS-13. The man was never charged or convicted of any crime. The Trump administration later admitted they made a mistake, but argued they couldn't do anything about it. Now, in another I think extremely important unanimous order, the Supreme Court has told the White House to take steps necessary to release Garcia from custody and, quote, ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. The ruling stopped short of ordering the man's return to the United States. His case, however, must go to a trial court, though it's not clear when that's going to happen. Let's bring MSNBC and NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. You know, Danny, we've had so much thrown at us over the first 3 months of the administration. And as we've said, I know as you've said, some of the other people have said, it's been intentional on the administration's part to flood the zone, to keep things coming, to see where the court bites, to see where the court doesn't bite. I think, Danny, and others I've spoken with believe that have covered this White House closely and Washington for a very long time, that two of the most important things that have happened over the last 3 months, at least from the judicial branch, came from the Supreme Court this past week. A 9-0 ruling that Brett Kavanaugh signed, where all 9 justices agreed, whether they were whatever side they were on the issue, that you can't just deport, whether you call them Venezuelan gang members or whoever you call them, you just can't deport somebody. They have to be given proper notice, and they have to be given due process in front of a judge. That is an extraordinarily clarifying opinion, and all 9 justices agreed with that part of the opinion. The second thing happened last night, and that was the return of Garcia, saying they have to facilitate the return of Garcia. And again, this wasn't 5-4. I must say, I expected this to be a 5-4 decision. I was that cynical. But once again, unsigned, which means 9-0. So talk about the impact of this decision last night in particular, but the two taken together this week and what it means.
Yeah, let's start with the decision last night. The order is a win for the Trump administration, and at least that's how they're going to play it. Here's what I mean. A real win for Garcia would have been an order that says, hey, administration, I hear the Salvadorian president's going to be here Monday. Put Garcia on the plane, seated next to him in a reclining seat, and he better be here Monday with the president. That would have been a clear win. The reason I say this, the administration is going to call this a win, is there's a lot of space, a lot of loophole potential in this order. Consider this. One of the lines that we put up there on the screen was that the court ordered him to be returned, or excuse me, to facilitate his return so his case could be handled as if it was properly handled. Remember, the 2019 order for Garcia by an immigration judge just really prevented his return to El Salvador. In theory, any of the other 193 countries out there might be perfectly all right. And if his case was handled the way it should have been, that could still result in his removal. And then there's even bigger wiggle room for the administration in the language with one word: effectuate. Yes, the lower court's order remains in place. The administration has to effectuate his return, but the court has to clarify, what does it mean by effectuate? I guarantee you, and here I am saying it now, the administration is going to say that whatever the district court clarifies effectuate means, the administration is going to say, well, guess what? We say you don't have the power to order us to do that, because you're essentially ordering us to engage in international relations, which you, an Article 3 court, another branch of the government cannot order us to do. And we're going to be right back here where we were this last week as this goes back up through the courts. I will just say, Joe, you're exactly right. Taken together, the two Supreme Court cases over the last week or so do stand for the idea that people subject to removal are entitled to due process. But sometimes even due process can be relatively hollow, because as long as they give them that notice and as long as they give them that hearing, arguably these folks can still be removed. So yes, a win for due process, but I promise you, hear me now, the administration will call this a win for themselves, or at least that's how they'll play their hand.
Right. Well, I mean, Claire McCaskill, I don't think anybody is arguing that if people are here illegally and if they may be members of Venezuelan gangs, or if they, they can be deported. That's not the issue. The issue is we need to know the facts. They need to be given notice. They need to be given the right to go before the court. And now you have the Supreme Court saying you have to give them that due process. And then if they're deported legally, if they're deported, in a way that is consistent with the law, that's all anybody could ask. In this case last night, though, I thought it was very interesting. The Supreme Court said, basically, we're going to follow the district court judge. They have to effectuate the return, not in a way that's going to get in the way of what Danny was talking about, the president's powers. And then the district court judge remodifying his order to be very consistent with the Supreme Court. So I guess just on general principle, general law, it's a very strong declaration by the Supreme Court. Now the question is, how does it get implemented?
Yeah, I do think that this opinion, I agree with Danny in that I think Roberts wanted a 9-0. I think he wanted everybody in the boat. And so they kind of played games with the semantics of this effectuate versus facilitate. The bottom line is this. The Supreme Court has unanimously told Donald Trump, you can't race to the airport with a bunch of people and get them out of the country and then claim you can do nothing about it. That no longer can happen. That game is over. And that's really the takeaway here. And we had a Trump judge yesterday also basically citing the Supreme Court, saying you've got to give notice, you've got to have a hearing. And that's really what I think we need in this country, is the court to unanimously, even if the language was a little hinky and they're going to have to go back and figure out the difference between effectuate and facilitate, it still is very strong that our Supreme Court unanimously said, no, Donald Trump, you can't do this, not in the United States of America.
Well, and that message also, of course, Jonathan Lemire, gets to members of ICE, members of other people who are getting instructions to do something that, again, if these were 5-4 decisions and they were ambiguous, that would be one thing. It may be ambiguous in the application of it, but the overall legal theory, the Supreme Court in both of these cases saying, as Claire said, unanimously. Again, this is like Nixon, U.S. v. Nixon when it was 8-0, unanimously. In this case, unanimously saying you can't round up people in the middle of the night. You can't grab people off the streets. You can't throw them in the back of the vans. You can't throw them on airplanes and then fly them, to El Salvador or somewhere else without giving them due process first. Again, there's, the devil's always in the details in both of these rulings. But the fact is the Supreme Court has now spoken out unanimously saying what we saw the first couple of months of the administration cannot happen moving forward.
Yeah, as we're so fond of saying on this show, two things can be true at once. There's some wiggle room. There's some details Danny rightly pointed out that are still up for debate. But this is still a message sent 9-0 from the Supreme Court. But lots of questions remain unanswered. This is not the only individual who attorneys and activists have said was improperly detained and deported. What happens to those others who are also in that El Salvador prison or who are also being held, like the Tufts student, like the Columbia activist in a prison in Louisiana right now, waiting for more legal proceedings? We also don't know, of course, Sam Stein, whether or not the Trump administration will listen. And that's, I feel like, the big part here is this dangerous moment is we keep hearing from this administration saying, oh, well, we're not going to defy court orders. We're not going to defy court orders, even though at times they've deflected, they've taken loopholes, they've attempted to get around them. They have claimed, anyway, they have not flat out refused them. This seems to be setting up a moment, if they don't cooperate here, where that could be. They could be defying not just any court, but the Supreme Court. Talk to us about this moment.
No, it's incredibly delicate, right? And I think we're all just sort of waiting to see what they do in response to this. I kind of count myself in the Danny camp, I guess, where they'll try to take a very narrow reading of this, maybe deport this man to a different country, maybe put him in Gitmo and say, well, we followed your order, and that's not really the spirit of the order, but it's technically under the order. But ultimately, look, I have to agree with Claire and Joe on this one, in that we had a situation in which the first Supreme Court decision said everyone is granted the right to a habeas petition. And then it raised the question, well, what if the administration decides, you know, we're going to get people out of the country before that petition could be heard? And then we're going to say, you know, they're in some foreign jurisdiction and it's no longer our responsibility. That was the nightmare scenario. If the Supreme Court said, well, once they go into El Salvador, yes, you're right. There's no jurisdiction. You can't do anything about it. That was the nightmare scenario. And what we have here, at least, is a situation in which the court says, no, you can't just do that. You can't just whisk people away without due process rights. You have to follow some normalcy, some normal rules. And now we wait, I guess. It's kind of an uncomfortable, scary proposition that we're just sort of waiting to see whether the White House will play cute with the law, whether they'll respect the law, or whether they'll violate it outright.
Well, and the question is, again, Pablo, how they implement this and how aggressively they implement it, which probably won't be that aggressively, how they try to get around this. But they will continue to say we are following court orders. They're going to continue, most likely, if you listen to what they've said the first 3 months, and if that continues forward, they may continue to try to do that. Again, though, the law is out there, and it can't underline this enough. When you're going against 9 Supreme Court justices, you can't dismiss Clarence Thomas as a left-wing Marxist lib judge when he's agreeing with the district court judge, who is an icon to so many conservative jurists in Washington, D.C., who they've dismissed as a Marxist. So now you've got Clarence Thomas, the ultimate conservative icon for a lot of legal scholars, saying, yeah, that district court judge that is at the center of the conservative legal movement in Washington, D.C., yeah, they're not Marxist judges. They're agreeing with the entire Supreme Court. You guys did it the wrong way the first 3 months. Bring him back, and let's get this right.